Hi, I'm Frank Chow. Welcome back to my channel. This is the third in a series of videos that I've created about 2 months ago, right? And today what we're going to do as we approach Christmas, right? Right now we are right in the middle of winter here. As we approach Christmas Day, right? I thought this would be a good time to basically tell about the story of an event that occurred on Christmas Day in 1776, right? Now, for those of you who are really not familiar with American history, right, this is where I think just touching on very few common knowledge points, it'll be very helpful to basically understand certain very pivotal events that saw the birth of America, right? Now, there's a famous painting that most people around the world would have seen, including many Asians, many Africans, and definitely many Europeans, not just Americans, right? But there's a famous painting called Washington Crossing the Delaware. Now, this painting itself was painted by a German-American artist in 1851, about almost 80 years after the event occurred. It basically depicted a momentous event on Christmas Day in 1776, whereby it became a launching pad for George Washington's very illustrious military career. Okay, now this painting, which was painted by Emmanuel Leutze, right, a German-American artist, like I said, right. There are various versions of it. There's at least one now, as far as I know, that is housed in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, right? So it's a very famous painting that people around the world have seen it, even though they may not understand the story behind it, right? All right, just to give you a general outline of what I'm going to say today about what exactly happened on that day, so, which is very important, right? Let's look at the start of the American Revolution in 1775. Now, this was about just over a decade after the end of the French-Indian War, right? But what happened during that time, in that span of about 10 to 15 years, many colonials who fought for the British Empire were very defiant towards their British master, even though they partake in their victory over the French, where the French were driven out of North America. By the time you talk about the 1770s, in a series of what the colonials or the patriots saw as unfair taxation, among other variables, among other reasons, right? This became the basis for the start of the American Revolution, where the former 13 English colonies began to revolt and fight for their independence. So back in 1775, when the founding fathers of America, right, voted to break away from England, right, George Washington, being their only well-known, I won't say the only well-known, but the best well-known experienced general from the French-Indian War, was now appointed as the commander-in-chief of the newly formed Continental Army, the Patriot Army, that would basically defend the 13 colonies' right to independence, right? So this is how George Washington became a pivotal player, and obviously he becomes the basis of the story behind our painting, the story of the painting itself. Now we move forward to 1776, the following year, right? What we do know is that the British has launched a major British expeditionary force that landed in New York Harbor in the summer of 1776, in the summer of 1776. It comprised of tens of thousands, I believe about 32,000 troops, right? And hundreds of ships, right? Hundreds of ships that they were going to put an end to this revolt, right? So you must remember, the most powerful nation in the world at the time, the superpower England, sent a very huge army and navy to basically seize back what they perceive as theirs, even though the patriots, the founding fathers of the American nation, or American colonies at the time, was seeking independence, right? And the newly formed Continental Army under George Washington was basically a ragtag army, right? An army that is really no match to the very experienced, very well-trained, well-paid, and well-armed, well-clothed British Expeditionary Force that came to New York Harbor in the summer of 1776, right? So that's basically the basis of the start of the story, which I'm going to tell very soon, right? So by the winter of 1776, as far as we know, George Washington's army was really not well clothed, well fed, right? Not even well armed. Some of the soldiers don't even have boots or even muskets, right? And they were barely surviving the winter of 1776, right? You're talking about November, December. So this sets the backdrop of what basically happened in December 25th on Christmas Day in 1776. All right, let's move on there. All right, I'm outdoors right now. So just to give you an idea of how the conditions were like, it was probably on a winter day, something like this, that George Washington's army was in Valley Forge, which is basically in the eastern part of Pennsylvania. So since I live in Pennsylvania, most of my videos have some relation to Pennsylvania itself. So in any case, George Washington's Continental Army was in eastern part of Pennsylvania, just outside Philadelphia, what is the area of Valley Forge itself. And as far as we know, his army itself was basically half-starved, not well clothed, not well armed, right? And there were cases of desertion, right? Some of the volunteers simply could not do it, right? Could not do it itself. All right, now we're coming close to Christmas Day itself, right? To the famous incident or event that led to the famous painting of Washington crossing the Delaware. So we're coming close to Christmas Day on 1776, right? So let's talk about Christmas itself. Whether you're in Singapore or any place around the world, we all know today that Christmas itself is basically a festive occasion. So even though you're not a Christian or a Catholic, many people around the world celebrate Christmas as a festive occasion of giving and receiving, right? Time to be merry, time to basically spend time not just with family, but also with friends. At times to party, to drink and be merry itself. All right, let me say this, right? How did Christmas itself became a festive occasion and not just a religious day itself, right? Now, Christmas as a festive occasion was basically started by the Germans, right? Germans, that was where it occurred, from a religious day to become a day of festivity, where you drink, you eat, and be merry, right? Now let me say this, right? The British Army itself that was in the 13 colonies, right, did not just comprise of British soldiers, but it also comprised of Hessian soldiers. Now, who were Hessian soldiers? Hessian soldiers were basically German soldiers, professional German mercenaries who fought under the British flag. So they were professional soldiers who fought for money, right? Hessian soldiers, right? Basic German soldiers, right? Now, Germany itself did not exist as a nation back in the 1700s. It really did not become a nation until the second half of the 19th century, right? Germany basically consisted of provinces like Bavaria, Prussia, states or provinces like that would later form what we all know today as Germany. So Hessian soldiers were basically Prussian soldiers, German-speaking Prussian soldiers who fought for money under the British flag, right? And they were considered like an elite force, dreaded by their enemies, and they were stationed in New Jersey. Now, New Jersey is just across the Delaware River from eastern Pennsylvania. So, I should add that if you have seen or you have known the story about Sleepy Hollow, where you have the famous headless horseman, the headless horseman at Sleepy Hollow, or you have seen the recent, well, not so recent, I guess, the Tim Burton adaptation of the story of Sleepy Hollow, where you have the headless horseman terrorizing the villages of Sleepy Hollow, right? In the movie adaptation by Tim Burton and starring Johnny Depp, right? The story was embellished further, where they tell you the origin of the headless horseman, in which, according to the movie version, the headless horseman was none other than a very nasty Hessian soldier or Hessian cavalryman whose haunted soul would terrorize the villages of Sleepy Hollow in the form of a headless horseman. So anyway, that gives you an idea of what a Hessian soldier or a Hessian cavalryman was. Basically, he was in the story of Sleepy Hollow, the movie version, right? He was originally a Hessian cavalryman during the American Revolution, all right, who basically lost his life, and his disgruntled soul, right, terrorized the villages of Sleepy Hollow. Well, that's just an example of where you can anchor a reference to popular culture. Now, the German colonel, or the Prussian or Hessian colonel that was in charge, his name was Johann Rall, right? As Christmas Day approaches, right, you must remember a lot of these Hessian soldiers, and like the colonel himself, was dying to celebrate Christmas, because after all, that's what they do back home in Germany. They were homesick and they were hoping to celebrate Christmas, but they were in the middle of a war in which, even though they were stationed in Trenton, New Jersey, the city of Trenton, New Jersey, they had to be on their toes, right, in case George Washington attacked from Pennsylvania, right, just across the river itself. Now, it's actually really pretty around here in winter, right? It's not really that cold. It's about maybe 31, 32 Fahrenheit, or coming close to zero, just under 0 Celsius. Which is really not cold by the standards around this area, right? Really not cold by the standards around this area itself. The Hessian colonel himself, right? And his soldiers were dying to celebrate Christmas, but they have to be on their toes, they have to be worried, right? So they had to postpone that. Now, what we do know is that George Washington's army was basically settling somewhere in Valley Forge, trying to survive the harsh conditions of winter, right? Much harsher than it is now today, right? Especially when you don't have enough food, not enough clothing itself, and you are really concerned about whether your soldiers can survive this winter, let alone defeat the enemy, right? Let alone defeat the enemy. Now, this brings us to a case of the story of John, this person by the name of John Honeywell, I believe, yeah, Honeywell himself, who basically acted like a double spy for George Washington, right? I may have got this wrong. It may be Honeyman and not Honeywell. I'm getting mixed up with the Honeywell company itself. I believe it's John Honeyman now, right? Who was a Scotch-Irish who served in the French-Indian War for the British, right? But you know, if you have an Irish background, right, you kind of hate the English, because back in Ireland they are trying to fight for their own independence. So you can see why he volunteered to be like a spy for George Washington. But in any case itself, even within the Continental Army side, with George Washington's side, right, the Patriot side, right, he was branded as a sort of a spy for the British, for the English, largely because at one time he served as a bodyguard for the famous British or English general Wolfe during the French-Indian War, right? But we know that his loyalties were kind of suspect because, you know, he's of Scotch-Irish background, and so he resented the British, right? Because after all, back in Ireland, they're trying to fight their independence against England, right? So this is where he volunteered to be a double spy for George Washington against the English, right? Against the English. Now, this was where he was sent over in a make-believe situation where he's supposed to be an escaped prisoner, right? From the Continental Army or the Patriot Army prison cells, where he was charged as a spy for the British, which actually he was not, but they faked the story that he was a runaway spy for the British, right? Who ran over to the English side, crossed into New Jersey, and surrendered himself to Johann Rau, the German colonel's soldiers just outside Trenton. Right there, he told a story that that he managed to escape from Washington's army. Right, he was unfairly tortured, brutalized, and now he brought all the information he needed to the Hessian colonel's side. And he told the Hessian colonel exactly what they really wanted to hear. He told them that George Washington's army was breaking down. They have no food, they have no clothing, many of his soldiers are deserting, and so the army, George Washington's army across the Valley Forge, across New Jersey into Pennsylvania, was basically disintegrating, right? Disintegrating itself, right? And so with that good news, right? With that good news, Colonel Rau, John Rau, decided that there should not be a threat from George Washington's army. So on Christmas Eve, they began celebrating Christmas. They drank, they'd be merry. He had about, I believe, 1,500 troops in Trenton. So they were allowed to be merry and enjoy the Christmas Eve festivity. After all, there's no threat posed by George Washington. Now, this is exactly the situation where George Washington wanted to basically lay the trap for the Hessian troops. So early on Christmas morning, the early wee hours while it was still dark, this is where George Washington and about 2,000 of his troops, I believe 2,400 of his troops, crossed the Delaware River on 41-foot-long boats, right? And basically launch an ambush on the unsuspecting Hessian troops that was guarding Trenton under John Rau, where we believe that out of the 1,500 Hessian soldiers, only 500 managed to escape. The rest were killed or captured and brought back into Pennsylvania, right? In fact, many of the Hessian soldiers, including Colonel Rau himself, was having a hangover, right, from the merry partying of Christmas Eve itself. They were still recovering on Christmas Day when George Washington's army attacked them, right? Now, using this momentum for the next few days, George Washington will actually following the attack, he retreated back to Pennsylvania, and then 4 days again came back and attacked Trenton, and with the momentum they went to attack and capture Princeton, right? Princeton itself. And the Hessian troops and the English soldiers, right, around there, basically the Hessian troops themselves, right, basically retreated to New York State, right? Well, I'll visit here. Somebody enjoying the snow with his ATV. So anyway, but we know that despite the momentum of surprise and ambush itself and pushing the British army and the Hessian soldiers back to New York, we know that they would regroup and with sheer numbers of force, they will come back and retake Princeton and Trenton itself, right? So for a while, for about 2 weeks, George Washington managed to hold on to Trenton and Princeton, and eventually they retreated back to not to Pennsylvania, to northern New Jersey in Morristown, right? And the English and the Hessian soldiers to recover Princeton and Trenton, right? So what's the significance about these events, right? This happened on Christmas Day, right? The Crossing the Delaware in 1776 that led to a very important victory. Now, this was actually not a very huge battle, right? You're talking only about involving a few thousand soldiers, not tens or hundreds of thousands of soldiers. But you must know that during 1776, the Continental Army, the ragtag army, was really down in the dumps. The morale was down, right? They were not well financed, well clothed, and they were concerned that maybe there's too many deserters and they don't have enough volunteers, right? But because of this important victory at Trenton and Princeton, right, more American colonials or English colonials began to volunteer in the Continental Army, right? And so the war itself would drag on for the next few years that eventually will culminate in a victory for the Americans, Patriot Army, and led to the independence of America, right? But so the event on December 25th, 1776, which became the basis of the painting of George Washington crossing the Delaware, or Washington crossing the Delaware River, the painting by German-American artist Emmanuel Leutze, right? So this is basically the story behind this famous painting, right? And so now we have ourselves coming towards Christmas Day in 2024, right? Coming to almost, how would I say, 250 years later, right? So in any case, right, I decided to tell this story outdoors, just to give an idea of the conditions, which was probably much worse back then in 1776. So that's basically the story of George Washington crossing the Delaware, which was a very important event in American history, in the American Revolution, which eventually led to the independence of the United States of America, right? To all of you around the world and also in Singapore, Merry Christmas.